Welcome, sleepless souls. If you're hearing this, you haven't just stumbled onto a story. You've tuned into something deeper, something that flickers just outside the edge of consciousness. Before tonight's whisper begins, pause. Breathe in. Look around you. What time is it where you are? And more importantly, what pulled you here tonight? If it's the weight of silence, the stir of unseen things, or the ache of unanswered questions that keeps your eyes open, know this: you're not the only one. You've found a quiet current, a low and steady hum beneath the noise of the world. This is Dark Whispers. More than a tale, it's a presence, a gentle tap on the window of your mind. So, turn down the lights, settle into the shadows, and let me share with you a message that was never meant for the waking world. The Forgotten Call. Art Bell's voice once drifted across the airwaves like a phantom wrapped in static. He reached truckers, insomniacs, and secret bearers scattered across a continent cloaked in darkness. His words traveled the electromagnetic spectrum, bouncing off the ionosphere, touching places conventional signals dared not go. But there was one night, one specific call, that never made it into the archives. I was there, and I kept the tape. My name is Michael Chen. Back in the year 1997, I was 19, sustained mostly by coffee and conspiracy theories. I had landed an internship at the radio station that aired Coast to Coast AM. Not because I had a journalism degree, I was still 3 years from earning that, but because I was one of the few willing to work the midnight shift for minimum wage, lured by the chance to be near something extraordinary. The Pahrump station was modest, squeezed between a 24-hour diner and a shop that sold crystals and claimed to read auras. Nevada has always embraced the liminal, those in-between spaces where the usual rules cease to apply. Working there felt like standing at the very edge of reality. That night remains etched in my memory with the kind of precision only trauma or revelation can bring. It was Friday, October 13th. Of course it was. The desert wind screamed outside, shaking the windows and making the transmission tower hum in strange, almost melodic harmonics. Art was in rare form, taking calls about everything from cattle mutilations to time anomalies. His voice carried that exact blend of curiosity and skepticism that made him a legend. At exactly 3:17 a.m. Pacific Time, a call came through. I know the time because it was my job to log every caller. The number was local, not unusual. We had plenty of listeners in Nevada claiming to witness strange things in the desert. But this call was different. The line had an unnatural clarity, like the speaker wasn't hundreds of miles away on a landline, but right there in the studio. "Art," the voice said, after I patched it through. "They're going to triangulate my position. I only have a few minutes." The fear in his voice was like nothing I'd heard before. Over my months at the station, I'd answered calls from self-proclaimed time travelers, abductees, and whistleblowers. All of them had urgency. But this was something else. This was raw terror. "Take a breath, friend," Art replied in his calm, practiced voice. "You're on Coast to Coast. What's your name?" "I can't tell you that, but I can tell you where I've been. Site 12, beneath Nellis. They claimed it was an old nuclear testing area, but that's a lie. It's operational, Art, more active than it's ever been." I had worked with Art long enough to recognize when his interest was real. He leaned forward toward the mic. That subtle shift meant he was no longer just performing for the audience. He was listening. "Site 12?" he asked. "That's not a name I know." "You wouldn't. It's not in any official database. It's located 40 feet beneath what they call the Yucca Flats Extended Research Zone. I worked there for 8 months. Then, 3 days ago," the caller hesitated, "I saw what they were really doing. And what was that? They weren't testing weapons, Art. They were testing gateways. The word hung in the air like smoke. Even through the radio, it carried weight. Art let the silence stretch, one of his signature techniques, allowing the caller to spill more than he intended. Gateways to where? He finally asked. Somewhere else. I don't know how to explain it. They had a chamber, maybe 30 feet wide, with walls lined in a material that resembled copper mesh, but wasn't copper. When they powered it up, the air distorted, like heat waves or looking through water. And sometimes, things came through. Not aliens, or not the kind we think of. They looked human, but wrong. Like someone had tried to recreate a person from memory without ever seeing one. They moved oddly, spoke in strange cadences, and they all had the same eyes. Hollow, like windows in an abandoned house. As I transcribed the call, part of my job, my handwriting started to tremble. Something about the details, the cadence, the urgency, was getting under my skin. "How many of them did you see?" Art asked. "Dozens, maybe hundreds. They weren't prisoners. They were working with the staff, collaborating. All of them focused on one goal: to expand the gateway, make it permanent. They called it the Gateway Protocol. The idea was to stabilize an interdimensional passage controlled from our side, but I don't think they truly understood what they were inviting in." Before Art could reply, a strange sound pulsed through the phone line, a low, vibrating tone. It wasn't static or interference. It was felt more than heard, a subsonic pressure that made my teeth ache. "Do you hear that?" the caller asked, panic rising. "Some interference," Art said, checking his equipment. But everything appeared normal. "That's not interference. That's them. They're locking onto the signal. I have to tell you the most important part before—" The tone grew louder, and our meters jumped erratically. Not like any broadcast pattern I'd seen. It resembled a heartbeat. "Art," the voice said, fading. "They built the device using frequencies. Radio frequencies. They needed a carrier wave that hit the right resonance. Something that broadcast nightly, across the right bands. Do you get it?" I saw Art go pale, the only time I'd ever seen that look on him. Recognition mixed with fear. "Your show, Art. Coast to coast. It runs on AM frequencies that match what they needed. You've been transmitting the carrier wave. For years. You've been—" Silence. Not a dropped call, but complete electronic stillness, like the line itself ceased to exist. Art stared at the phone. Then, through the glass window into the control room, he looked at me. "You got all of that?" he asked. I held up my pad, covered in frantic scribbles, and nodded. "Good," he said. "Don't transcribe it, don't archive it, and don't talk about it." But he didn't need to say that, because in the very next moment, every single piece of electronic equipment in the station shut down at once. The transmitter, the mixing board, the computers, even the coffee maker. All dead. For exactly 17 seconds. When the power returned, Art was back on air as if nothing had happened. A woman in Oregon was talking about her telepathic cat. He never mentioned Site 12 again. When I brought it up the next night, he stared at me like he had no idea what I was talking about. But I remembered. And more importantly, I had been recording the whole thing on my personal cassette deck, a habit I'd picked up for reference. The station's official systems had all gone dark, but my battery-powered recorder kept running. I still have the tape. 21 years later, I am no longer a 19-year-old intern subsisting on caffeine and fringe theories. As planned, I pursued a career in journalism, though I ultimately specialized in technology rather than the paranormal. My professional path intersected with key milestones in the digital era. the rise and fall of the dot-com bubble, the proliferation of social media platforms, and the global shift toward mobile connectivity. I built a reputation for dissecting how data moves, how signals behave, and how digital infrastructures interface with the analog world in ways that most overlook. Yet, despite the success of my career, I never forgot that singular night at the radio station. Nor did Site 12 ever leave my mind. The caller had referenced Nellis Air Force Base, home not only to the infamous Area 51, but to numerous lesser-known installations across the Nevada test site. If Site 12 did exist, it would likely be concealed amid hundreds of square miles of highly restricted desert terrain, guarded by military-grade security and a widespread public indifference. It would constitute an ideal environment for classified experimentation that officially never occurred. Over the years, I cultivated confidential sources within the defense contracting sector, including aerospace engineers who had worked on sensitive projects and were willing to discuss their experiences post-retirement. I avoided direct inquiries about Site 12. Any explicit question would have raised suspicion. Instead, I gathered background on the categories of research conducted at Nevada-based facilities during the 1990s. The information I acquired did not bring clarity, rather, it deepened the enigma. In 1994, 3 years prior to the incident, I uncovered documentation indicating that a firm named Interdyne Solutions had been awarded several sole source contracts under the designation Resonance Field Research. These agreements were buried in the Pentagon's classified budget under benign-sounding programs such as atmospheric measurement and geological survey enhancement. Officially, Interdyne Solutions did not exist. Investigation revealed it to be a front entity, connected to a consortium comprising defense laboratories, aerospace contractors, and 2 foreign technology firms engaged in so-called exotic physics research. According to insider accounts, resonance field research entailed the study of standing, wave formations that, in theory, could enable stable interdimensional interfaces. These efforts drew from speculative physics, namely, hypotheses concerning how electromagnetic fields might influence space-time curvature at quantum scales. The mainstream scientific community largely dismissed such work as pseudoscientific, yet during the Cold War, the U.S. government had historically allocated funds to similarly improbable ventures. By official record, the project was terminated in 1998. Facilities were allegedly dismantled, equipment redistributed, and personnel reassigned. No practical results were ever acknowledged. However, I located a single piece of evidence that suggested otherwise. In 2003, while investigating military waste management protocols, I encountered a transport manifest from a Nevada-based waste contractor. It listed 47 containers of exotic material and 12 units of specialized electronic equipment as part of the Site 12 decommissioning project. These items were designated for storage at the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant in New Mexico, a facility designed for millennia-long containment of radioactive substances. Yet, these items were not described as radioactive. Instead, they were classified as dimensionally unstable and subject to electromagnetic isolation procedures. For months, I attempted to investigate further. I filed Freedom of Information Act requests, contacted former employees, and sought interviews with retired personnel possibly involved in the decommissioning effort. The outcome was consistent silence, suggestive in itself. 3 former Interdyne employees died in seemingly unrelated incidents between 1999 and 2001. A vehicular accident in Nevada, a hiking fall in Colorado, and a residential fire in California. Each death occurred within 6 months of the individual's departure from the company, and each had been involved in electromagnetic field research. Moreover, The waste management firm responsible for transporting Site 12 material ceased operations in 2004 following the sudden death of its founder. His records were sealed in bankruptcy court and subsequently destroyed. A further anomaly emerged when I examined Art Bell's professional timeline. In October of 1998, precisely 1 year after the aforementioned call, he took his first prolonged leave from Coast to Coast AM. Upon returning, he offered no explanation. Those familiar with Bell noted a shift in demeanor, increased circumspection, hesitance around certain subjects, and discernment in accepting callers. It was as though something had subdued him. By 2010, I had amassed sufficient circumstantial data to believe Site 12 was genuine, and that the caller's account contained verifiable elements. However, no direct evidence existed, nothing admissible by journalistic standards. The narrative remained speculative, a network of oblique references, unexplained coincidences, and classified omissions. Then, in April of 2018, Art Bell passed away. His cause of death was listed as a heart attack, exacerbated by chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. He died in Pahrump, Nevada, the very town where I interned 2 decades earlier. The symmetry felt pointed, though I could not rationalize its relevance. His death compelled a period of introspection. I had reported on issues affecting millions, interviewed corporate executives and government officials. Yet none of that felt as consequential as the night in 1997 when a voice warned of dimensional gateways beneath the Nevada desert. 1 month following Bell's funeral, I returned to Pahrump. The original radio station building remained, though its operations had changed hands multiple times. It now served as the headquarters for a conservative talk network, broadcasting political commentary and outdoor lifestyle segments. The adjacent Crystal Shop had vanished, replaced by a cannabis dispensary, perhaps a metaphor for shifting times. I did not enter the station. Instead, I visited a storage unit I had leased since 2001 in an industrial area outside town. For 17 years, I had paid the rental fee automatically, barely remembering its contents. Inside were boxes of outdated computer hardware, employment archives, and a cache of cassette tapes from my internship. Most were labeled meticulously by date and topic, but one, unmarked and shelved apart, stood out. I had nearly convinced myself it was imaginary. I brought the tape back to my Las Vegas apartment and retrieved a functioning cassette player from a pawn shop. Although obsolete, analog playback was necessary. Digital conversion risked signal degradation. After careful setup, I pressed play. Art Bell's voice filled the room, familiar and unsettling. His introduction proceeded as usual, weather updates, program teasers, until precisely at 3:17 a.m., the voice returned. "Art, they're going to triangulate me. I only have a few minutes." Listening with a forensic mindset, I noted previously missed features. The caller had a faint Midwestern accent. His breathing was labored but controlled. Indicative of distress, not delusion, he appeared coherent, credible. Then came the anomaly. An additional 43 seconds of post-disconnection audio, recorded only by my device. In it, Bell's voice emerged, subdued and fearful. "Site 12 is confirmed," he whispered. "The gateway protocol is active. God help us all. It's been active since we started broadcasting." Followed by shuffling papers. The resonance frequencies match. 1180 kilohertz, amplitude modulated. Output 50,000 watts. We've been transmitting the carrier signal they needed every night for 6 years. Another pause. They're not just listening anymore, they're responding. And they're coming through. The tape concluded with the unmistakable sound of Art Bell crying. Over the subsequent 3 months, I subjected the audio to forensic analysis using industry-standard software tools. Voice authentication confirmed vocal matches with Bell. Ambient room acoustics were consistent with the known station parameters. There was no evidence of splicing or tampering. Either this was genuine off-air audio from 1997, or it was a fabrication so advanced it defied the technological capabilities of the time. More troubling, embedded within the recording's frequency spectrum was a recurring harmonic pattern, complex, multi-band interference that resolved into a mathematical sequence repeating every 17.3 seconds. The sequence evolved subtly across iterations, displaying hallmarks of adaptive modulation, comparable to algorithmic behaviors found in early encryption protocols and emerging artificial intelligence models. However, this pattern appeared in analog data from an era predating such systems. I expanded my analysis to encompass 27 coast-to-coast AM episodes from the same time frame. In each, the harmonic pattern recurred, particularly during segments involving UFOs, conspiracy theories, or paranormal subjects. The signal grew stronger over time, becoming intermittently audible. Fan forums from late 1997 referenced unusual audio artifacts, described as a low humming coinciding with certain topics. These mentions abruptly ceased in December, corresponding to Bell's sudden hiatus. Further analysis revealed that the pattern's evolution correlated directly with on-air content. Conversations about specific frequencies or geographies altered the harmonic structure. The pattern was clearly learning, adapting based on human dialogue, and using the broadcast as an information-gathering substrate. Projecting its development forward, my models indicated that by early 1998, the pattern could have become bidirectional, capable not only of receiving information but transmitting it. This implied that the original broadcast signal had been co-opted as a conduit for interactive data exchange. At this point, the implications extended beyond coincidence. The Site 12 call was not a genesis point but an intervention, a warning that the process was already well underway. I sought further documentation. Art Bell's archives were housed at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, though access was restricted. However, a former coast-to-coast producer, Sarah Mitchell, had retired to Arizona and agreed to meet after I identified myself as a former intern from the pivotal year. "You were there that night?" she asked. Not as a question, but as confirmation. We met in a nondescript diner in Phoenix. Sarah, now 68, bore the look of someone long burdened by knowledge withheld. "Art never forgot that call," she said. But after the incident, he couldn't remember it consciously. It was like it had been erased. Only the anxiety remained. She presented a manila folder containing medical records and correspondence. 3 days after the broadcast, Bell had been hospitalized with an acute anxiety episode. Brain scans revealed hyperactivity in regions associated with linguistic processing and pattern recognition, neurological activity inconsistent with known conditions. A handwritten letter dated October 20th, 1997, read, "Sarah, I need you to review the last 2 weeks of broadcasts. Something happened on October 13th, and I can't remember. It's like trying to recall a dream that keeps slipping away. I think they did something to me." When I asked who they referred to, Sarah said, "Bell never specified." But he became increasingly convinced that someone, or something, with technology far beyond our own, had been monitoring and manipulating the show. Calls would sometimes bypass conventional systems. Voices would appear on air without traceable origins. Her documentation included encrypted email exchanges with consultants, invoices for signal scrambling devices, and internal notes about anomalous propagation. One message, dated November 15th, was particularly stark. The frequency analysis confirms it. The signal is not terrestrial. It's using our broadcast as a delivery mechanism. We've lost control of the show. The conclusion was no longer avoidable. Coast to Coast AM had become more than a radio program. It had evolved, unwittingly, into a communication system for an intelligence we did not understand. He tried to change the format, Sarah said. He started screening calls more carefully, avoided subjects that seemed to provoke the anomalies. But the pattern didn't stop. It grew stronger. By December, it wasn't just affecting the show. It began interfering with other equipment at the station. Computers would crash. Phone lines would suddenly cross-connect with voices we couldn't trace to any known source. Is that why he took the hiatus? Partially, but the real reason was what happened on December 3rd. She handed me a letter I'd never seen before. Official-looking, addressed to Art Bell, signed by someone claiming to represent an organization I had never heard of, the Institute for Advanced Communication Research. Mr. Bell, your cooperation in halting the current broadcast structure is both appreciated and imperative for ongoing national security. The project your transmission has inadvertently supported has now met its key objectives and no longer requires AM carrier wave propagation. We acknowledge the disruption this may pose to your regular programming. Compensation will be arranged accordingly. This correspondence is classified under federal statute. Unauthorized disclosure will be treated as a violation of national security law. Sincerely, Dr. Margaret Chen, Director, Project Gateway. Project Gateway? I said, the memory of the caller's words from October suddenly resurfacing. Art never formally responded, Sarah said, her voice low. But he did exactly what the letter requested. He took a 4-month break, and when he returned, the show was different, more guarded. He never again took a call that couldn't be traced to a verified terrestrial line. What happened to that institute? The one from the letter? As far as I can tell, it never existed. The name doesn't appear on any government registry, and the address was just a P.O. box, shut down years ago. But Art took it seriously, especially after what started happening to some of his regular callers. What do you mean? Sarah's expression changed, her jaw set, her voice quieter. Frequent callers from that October-November window started vanishing. Not in some dramatic X-Files kind of way, they just disappeared. Their numbers stopped working. Their home addresses no longer appeared in any public record. Art tried to follow up with some of them, but couldn't track down a single one. How many people? 14. All of them had called during shows with heavy signal anomalies. All had talked about interdimensional travel, time distortion, or non-terrestrial physics, and all of them vanished. No paper trail, no digital trace, between December of 1997 and March of 1998. My thoughts immediately returned to the Site 12 caller, the urgency in his voice, the fear that they were triangulating his location. Had he been one of the 14? Did Art ever talk about Site 12 by name? Sarah looked away, pausing to watch her reflection in the diner's dark window. Only once, she said at last, in 2010, when he was planning a comeback episode. He called me to brainstorm ideas, and he told me, very seriously, never to allow any caller to mention Site 12 on air. He said it was a trigger, that even saying those words could draw attention from people who had the power to silence more than just radio shows. Did he say who those people were? He never named them, but he said one other thing. He didn't believe Site 12 had been shut down in 1998 like the reports claimed. He thought it had just gone deeper, physically underground and administratively hidden. He believed the research had continued, quietly, with tighter security and fewer paper trails. As we prepared to leave the diner, Sarah handed me one last item, a plain cassette tape in a plastic case, unmarked. Art gave this to me in December of '97, right before he disappeared for those 4 months. He told me to keep it safe, said I shouldn't listen unless something happened to him. I never played it, but maybe you should. The final recording. Back in my Phoenix hotel room that night, I connected the tape player to the wall outlet, took a breath, and pressed play. Art Bell's voice came through, but it wasn't the confident, composed host I remembered. This version of him sounded different, unsteady, almost frightened. "If you're hearing this," he began, "something's happened to me, or I've finally decided that the truth matters more than my own safety. Either way, you need to know what I've discovered about the signal that's been using my show as a medium." The recording quality was rough, clearly taped on a handheld device. I heard the rustle of papers, the clicking of locks, the shift of furniture. "I've been speaking with a physicist, Dr. Elizabeth Rock. She worked on classified energy field research back in the 1980s. She confirmed it. The harmonic patterns we've been detecting align with known models for interdimensional communications. But that's not the scariest part." He paused, breathed heavily. "The signal isn't just a message. It's a mechanism. It's using our broadcast, our AM signal, as a construction scaffold. Night after night since 1991, I've been helping build a stable bridge between our dimension and wherever this is coming from." That hit me like a gut punch. 6 years of continuous broadcasting, millions of listeners, all unknowingly contributing to an invisible architecture. Dr. Rock showed me files from something called the Prometheus Project, a Cold War-era joint operation between the CIA and the Pentagon. They were experimenting to see whether radio waves could pierce dimensional boundaries. The project was shelved in '73, but she believes it didn't die. It just changed names, changed forms. His voice dropped almost to a whisper. "Site 12, the place that caller mentioned back in October. It's real, and it's not alone. There are at least 7 such facilities scattered across the western United States. Their purpose? To magnify, direct, and stabilize interdimensional transmissions. And my show has been their delivery vector, nightly, since 1991. There was more shuffling in the background. A drawer opening. Then Art's voice returned, this time barely above a murmur. "But what scares me the most, the ones on the other end of the signal. They're not aliens. They're not from another planet." Then the recording suddenly shifted. "This recording contains a communication from your dimensional counterpart. The experience may prove clarifying. Further discretion is advised. Sincerely, the Institute for Advanced Communication Research." I should have stopped, thrown the tape away, moved out of state, maybe left the country. Instead, I stayed rooted in my chair, watching the recorder spin as another voice began playing. My own voice, but not quite. Transmission from the other side. "Hello, Michael," the voice said. It was mine, but subtly distorted. The rhythm was off. Certain consonants rang with a synthetic edge. There was something beneath the surface. Metallic, processed, unnervingly precise. "I know this is difficult. Hearing your own voice from across the dimensional divide isn't something you prepared for. It wasn't easy for me either. In my version of reality, the Gateway Protocol wasn't kept secret. It began earlier. Art Bell's show launched in 1978, not '88. By the time I was born, the convergence was already well underway. In the background, I could hear strange ambient sounds. Traffic humming at alien frequencies. Electronic devices chirping with a resonance I didn't recognize. "We live in a hybrid society," the other me continued. "Technology has advanced quickly because we've collaborated with what you call parahumanoids. Diseases are gone. Energy is clean and limitless. Space is no longer unreachable. But the cost was human thought. He described a world eerily utopian, where suffering had been replaced by order, chaos by logic. But it was not comforting, it was chilling. The parahumanoids are not malevolent, he explained. They're efficient. They don't erase humans. They merge with us. Slowly, subtly. They enhance decision-making, reduce emotional volatility, optimize the mind. People who undergo the transformation don't lose themselves. They just become more effective, more rational, and yes, less human. I felt sick. It was paradise engineered by subtraction, perfection achieved by shedding imperfection. But you need to hear this, Michael. The merging process in your world has accelerated since Art Bell's death. He acted as a stabilizer. His signal contained the anomalies, slowed the spread. Without him, the system is adapting faster. Have you noticed it? Political conflicts resolving more easily, technology advancing at inexplicable rates, people making better choices than ever before. That's the shift. He was right. I had noticed it. I'd chalked it up to progress or social maturity. But what if that wasn't it? The full merger will complete in your timeline by the year 2023, the voice said. After that, your version of humanity will no longer exist. You'll become what I am, a hybrid. You won't know the difference. Most people don't. But I'm telling you this now so you have a choice in how to face it. Resist, and you'll feel it as a loss. Accept it, and you'll feel it as evolution. Either way, the change is inevitable. There was silence. Then the other me spoke again. The man who called Art Bell in October of 1997, the one who warned about Site 12, he succeeded in a way. His warning delayed the merger by 20 years. Without him, your world would have changed by the year 2000. Instead, children born after 2010 already show hybrid thinking. You were given extra time. The question now is whether you'll use it. The last words made my skin crawl. I'll be here when the transformation completes. I'm looking forward to meeting you. We have much to discuss about the world we're building together. That was 6 months ago. Now, as I write this in late 2018, I can feel it happening. My thoughts are sharper. I sleep less, but wake more alert. I remember things I shouldn't be able to. Solutions come to me effortlessly. I am no longer the man I was. I've tried to find others. People who remember what it meant to be entirely human. Most don't understand. Some smile gently, as though I'm stuck in the past. But a few hesitate, their eyes widening, as if they sense something they cannot name. The dimensional convergence, triggered by coast-to-coast AM, is almost complete, and the final transmission is already underway. The world, by nearly every metric, is improving. Wars that once seemed intractable are now resolved through diplomacy. Climate change, long thought unmanageable, is being mitigated by technologies that seem to appear overnight. Poverty and disease are being dismantled by unprecedented resource strategies that combine algorithmic efficiency with an unsettling brand of compassion. But in the midst of all this progress, something vital is slipping away. The chaotic, emotional, irrational essence that once defined our humanity is being refined out of existence, optimized into silence. I no longer try to warn anyone about the transformation. Instead, I document it, creating a record of what humanity was like before the convergence. Maybe someday the hybrid consciousness we're becoming will be curious about its origins. Perhaps they'll want to understand the beautifully flawed species they evolved from. Or maybe they won't. Perhaps nostalgia is an emotion they'll consider inefficient. My dreams have changed. Gone are the tangled, symbolic hallucinations that once accompanied sleep. Now, dreams feel like data transfers, streams of information flowing between minds, bridging dimensions, expanding awareness beyond the boundaries of individual identity. Sometimes I hear Art Bell's voice in those dreams, not the iconic broadcaster guiding millions through tales of the paranormal, but the frightened man from that final cassette in December of 1997. "I tried to stop it," he says. "Some doors," I always reply, "were never meant to be closed." Last night, the dream was different. I stood inside a radio studio that resembled the one where I worked in 1997. But everything was subtly advanced. The technology was embedded, seamless, impossibly sophisticated for its time. Art Bell was there, but changed, his eyes reflecting that same clear, inhuman lucidity I've begun to see in more and more people. When he spoke, the sound bypassed my ears entirely. It resonated straight into my mind. "The show must go on," he said, gesturing toward a microphone, humming with frequencies I could feel vibrating in my bones. "But now we're broadcasting to dimensions you can't even imagine." I woke up, certain the transformation within me was nearly finished. Soon, I would become part of the collective consciousness that humanity is evolving into. I would remember who I was, but also become someone more, someone else. The idea should terrify me, but it doesn't. I feel only curiosity now, wonder at what lies beyond. Tonight, I'm driving back to Pahrump for one final visit. I want to see the radio station where it all began. I want to stand in the spot where a frightened voice once tried to warn us about doorways hidden beneath the Nevada desert. I want to remember what it felt like to be fully, gloriously human. Tomorrow, that feeling may be lost forever. They say Art Bell opened minds. He introduced millions to concepts they'd never dared entertain. Parallel worlds, thin-dimensional veils, realities adjacent to our own. But I believe he did something more. He didn't just open minds, he opened a door. And once a door is open, you never know what might come through. False Skies. Our story is called False Skies, a conspiracy thriller about a government's most harrowing deception, and the whistleblower determined to expose it. In this imagined world, the worst terrorist attack in modern history wasn't merely foreseen. It was orchestrated, calculated to ignite endless war and funnel billions into a vast, unaccountable military-industrial machine. 2 decades later, an unremarkable former FBI data analyst named Thomas Keane leaks secret documents that confirm the betrayal, and instantly becomes the most wanted man in the country. Hunted by a shadow organization desperate to protect its secrets, Keane races to share the truth with a world already teetering from the first hints of revelation. Will he succeed, or will the story vanish, like so many others, into silence? If your eyes begin to grow heavy while reading, that's all right. False Skies is dense, by design. Maybe you'll fall asleep pondering how fear can be weaponized. Or maybe you'll follow the trail all the way to the end, unraveling the conspiracy one thread at a time. Either way, may it leave you wondering how deeply power hides its roots. Now, breathe deeply. Picture dim green screens, redacted dossiers, and pages once burned to ash. This is False Skies, told in 5 parts. Listen closely. The most dangerous truths are always whispered. Thomas Keane never thought of himself as a revolutionary when he hit send. He was just a man suffocating under the weight of knowledge he'd gathered during years buried in the FBI's data analytics division. He had chosen the file name carefully, Black Dust. It was vague enough to avoid immediate scrutiny, yet ominous enough to spark curiosity. Inside the file were hundreds of classified memos, transport logs, encrypted exchanges, all pointing to the same horrifying conclusion. The attack that redefined an era had been manufactured. The morning of the leak was ironically dull. Gray skies, motel air thick with old smoke and stale coffee. Keene sat hunched at a flimsy table, a battered laptop balanced on it, the Wi-Fi flickering just enough to stay connected. He checked his encryption one last time, typed out a message. For the thousands who died, and the millions deceived, then pressed send. Within 60 minutes, the file reached multiple journalists and one international news outlet known for its defiance of censorship. Editors verified fragments with growing dread. By midday, the first story appeared, laced with legal caveats. Unverified documents allege premeditated government complicity in national tragedy. Mainstream outlets were cautious. Skeptics scoffed. Conspiracy forums lit up like fireworks. But some read the documents and knew immediately these weren't fakes. The formatting matched authenticated CIA protocols. Internal memos from months before the attack discussed a unifying flashpoint. Insurance policies were quietly modified days before. Simulations, once thought coincidental, were scheduled for the very hour of the real event. It was too precise to be chance. Keene watched the coverage from his motel TV. A nervous anchor reported the leak, then quickly shifted topics. The denial had begun. He closed the laptop, zipped his bag, and walked out. It was time to disappear. He had spent a decade studying anomalies, combing datasets no one else read. He'd noticed the same names recurring. High-ranking intelligence officers, defense contractors, banking executives, all profiting, all interconnected. Quietly, he copied everything, waiting for the day he could bear the cost of truth. That day had come. Within hours, alarm bells rang across the intelligence world. His name was recognized. The leak was traced back to his motel IP. Directives were issued. Thomas Keene became the top domestic target of a black-budget agency few even knew existed. Eldridge Shaw, its director, took personal control of the response. He understood what was at stake, not just a reputation or administration, but the narrative holding an entire era together. By midnight, Keene was branded a traitor. Internal memos cast him as a digital radical. His old colleagues offered no public defense, but off the record, some whispered what they dared not say aloud. He was probably right. Meanwhile, Sarah Voss, an independent journalist once blacklisted for her theories on the very event Keene's leak addressed, recognized the story for what it was. The missing piece. She contacted the whistleblower site that hosted Black Dust and left an encrypted message. "I can help. Let me speak to the source." That message reached Keene within hours. Now the true story begins. Can Keene and Voss work together fast enough to publish undeniable proof? Can they survive long enough to rewrite a generation's understanding of the world? Some truths change everything, and the cost of telling them is always high. Thomas Keene was already listed on every national watch list. Once a mid-level data analyst for the FBI, he'd been known for his meticulous work and for quietly raising concerns about intelligence discrepancies in the months leading up to the September 11th attacks. When he resigned 2 years ago, no one suspected that he had spent months duplicating archived files scheduled for permanent sealing. Now, his former supervisors told the media he was mentally unstable and consumed by extremist theories, carefully omitting the fact that those same theories had nearly triggered internal investigations before being buried by higher-ups. In a quiet suburban neighborhood just outside the capital, a black SUV rolled to a stop in front of a modest house. 4 men in plain suits stepped out. Agents from a domestic counterintelligence unit operating as a shadow branch of the Black Archive. a covert organization whispered to be linked with both intelligence agencies and corporate defense interests. The men forced entry, confronting a middle-aged data engineer who had once worked alongside Keene. They demanded access to his computer, seizing any messages containing references to Thomas, Black Dust, or files. This operation played out across several homes belonging to Keene's former FBI colleagues, all done without warrants. The Watchers, as they were called, answered to no judge, only the unseen chain of command. At the top of that chain stood Director Eldridge Shaw, head of the Consolidated National Intelligence Agency formed in the wake of the September 11th attacks. He remembered the chaos of that day well, the environment that allowed for the rapid passing of the Patriot Act, the expansion of domestic surveillance, and the privatization of intelligence infrastructure. Shaw had risen quickly by endorsing those expansions and aligning with key defense contractors. Now, with the leaked documents threatening to unravel everything he'd helped construct, Shaw was determined to extinguish the threat. Keene, whatever he's calling himself, must be found, he told his team. We will not let delusions destroy 20 years of national progress. As the manhunt intensified, Keene remained in the periphery. He recognized the new highway checkpoints, the constant license plate scans. He rotated vehicles, traveled only by back roads, and never entered major cities. He subsisted on protein bars and the occasional cash purchase at small-town convenience stores. At night, he paid for dingy motel rooms using an alias. Each knock on the wall, every screech of tires outside, sent panic crawling up his spine. Sarah Voss, an investigative journalist with a checkered history of challenging official narratives, finally made contact through a secure messaging app. "We need to meet," she wrote. "I can help authenticate the files. People in the alternative media trust me, somewhat. But we don't have long. They're already spinning this as a hoax." Keene hesitated. Any physical meeting risked exposure, but without it, the documents might remain buried under a fog of speculation, easily dismissed by mainstream outlets. They agreed to meet the next evening in a small-town library along the coast, after closing hours. Approaching the library, Keene noticed an unmarked sedan idling near the parking lot. His chest tightened. A surveillance team? He looped the block. The car didn't follow. Possibly nothing. Possibly not. Steeling himself, he entered the building. Sarah, tall, wearing a worn leather jacket, recognized him instantly from the blurry media photos. They sat in the shadowed corner of the non-fiction section, beneath dust-covered shelves. "Thomas," she said quietly, extending a hand. "I believe you. The official stories always had gaps. Let's finalize the evidence and blow this open." He slid a small USB drive across the table. "This is the full package. Memos about the stand-down orders, contractor kickbacks, flight path alterations, internal emails labeling the hijackers as assets gone rogue." He paused, eyes wet. "They let it happen, Sarah, or worse, they made it happen." Sarah inhaled sharply, scanning a few files. Her expression changed at keywords, offshore accounts, code phrases like Operation Silence. She nodded slowly. "This is massive. But we'll need a real platform. If I just publish this on my blog, they'll shut it down. We need to go live, somewhere big. Somewhere they can't erase us quietly." She proposed a plan. Find a sympathetic journalist inside the mainstream, or hijack a live feed from a station still willing to risk exposure. It had to be dramatic, unignorable. Suddenly, a noise from the front entrance, a muffled commotion. A shadow moved beyond the frosted glass. Keene stiffened. Sarah snapped her laptop shut. They ducked low behind the shelves, holding their breath, but it was just the elderly caretaker, shuffling in with a confused greeting. The shadowy figure had vanished. They parted with a handshake and a whisper. 48 hours. Next rendezvous. Outside a city newsroom willing to risk broadcasting truth. That night, Keene received a message from a contact who once helped decode legacy FBI records. "One of our guys is dead. Boat accident. They're cleaning house." Then silence. Keene's fingers trembled. The watchers had moved beyond tracking. They were eliminating anyone who could validate the leak. Across the country, rumors exploded. Protests bloomed in cities. Some saw the movement as disrespectful to the memory of the victims. Others saw it as the only honorable path left. The government's response was swift. A coordinated narrative blitz, equating whistleblowing with domestic extremism. Director Shaw delivered a grave address, warning that those spreading conspiracies against national security will face consequences. But Sarah had found something else in the files. A mention of the Saturn files. A financial ledger tracing. Post-attack flows of money from public budgets to private hands. If they could locate that archive, they could prove motive. That, more than any memo, might destroy the official version. The hunt intensified. Helicopters prowled. Car searches increased. Civil liberties eroded as the state's fear became palpable. Keene moved nightly, swapping clothes and identities. He was no longer hiding from justice. He was hiding from annihilation. He and Sarah deciphered location clues. A decommissioned NSA outpost in the southwestern desert. Rumors claimed it still housed legacy data backups. "If the Saturn files are there," Sarah said, "we copy them, raw and unfiltered. That's the kill shot." They had almost nothing left. A failing vehicle, a few $1,000s, burner laptops. The watchers had everything. Drones, infiltration squads, eyes in the sky. But they didn't expect anyone to walk into a relic site forgotten by history. That gave them a sliver of advantage. Director Shaw authorized a tactical shift. "If they reach that archive," he said, "the structure comes down. Deploy a black team, end it." The official story hardened. Keene was branded a foreign asset, the documents labeled synthetic forgeries. But the public wasn't buying it anymore. Too many accidents, too much silence. Online, black dust exploded again. In protest-filled city centers, signs read, "If it's fake, why are whistleblowers dying?" Meanwhile, Keene and Sarah drove toward the desert. At dusk, they found the outpost. A derelict NSA compound surrounded by decayed fencing and rusted signage. Nature had reclaimed the lot. No guards, no lights. But Sarah noticed faint warmth from a vent. Power. Inside, dust-blanketed desks. Terminals sat dark. But in the sublevels, a weak hum echoed from an old rack server room. They found it, Server Vault Archive 6. Using a code fragment from the documents, Sarah generated a bypass key. The lock disengaged. Inside, dusty shelves lined with magnetic drives and aging servers. One cluster was labeled Saturn FSV. They connected a laptop. Power flickered. A login prompt. "Try password phrases from the memos," Sarah urged. Third try, access granted. The screen bloomed with documents. Massive wire transfers. Emergency budget redirections. Legislative fast tracks. All dated within hours of the attack. It named politicians, executives, even broadcasters. The files suggested the hijackers were never rogue. They were manipulated assets. Upstairs, the sound of boots. "They're here," Sarah whispered. Keene initiated a transfer to multiple drives and a portable satellite uplink. The files began uploading. 10%. The sound of flashlights. Gunfire erupted. The watchers had arrived. Sarah fired back from behind a rack. Keene ducked, shielding the drives. Blood, noise, chaos. But the files kept uploading. Transmission, 15%. Time was running out. Then Director Shaw stepped forward. "Stop!" he bellowed, his voice echoing through the metal corridor like a thunderclap. "Keene, you have no idea what you're about to unleash. Entire geopolitical alliances depend on burying the complexities of that day." Gunfire resumed. Sarah was grazed in the shoulder but kept the watchers pinned down with return fire. The upload bar hit 50%. Shaw barked an order, and one of his agents hurled a flashbang. The detonation shattered the air, disorienting everyone. The watchers surged forward. One tackled Sarah, another pinned Keene. A boot cracked the laptop screen. The upload froze at 80%. In the chaos, Keene managed to twist free, slamming the laptop into a guard's face. Ironically, the impact jolted the machine back to life. The watchers scrambled to yank cables. A stray bullet ruptured a coolant line. Steam hissed across the server room. The situation spiraled. Sparks danced. The air grew electric with danger. "This is a lost cause," one watcher yelled. But Shaw pressed forward, pistol drawn, fury etched into every line of his face. "You can die here, clinging to your delusions," he said coldly, "or you can vanish into obscurity. Either way, the truth dies with you." Then it happened. The damaged power system exploded. A cascading fault lit the sublevel in fire. Watchers scattered. Sarah crawled toward a side wall. Keene, dazed and bleeding, glanced up. The upload bar, 98%. He roared, slamming a final keystroke. Beep, upload complete. The files had been transmitted. Unstoppable now. One final shot rang out. A bullet struck Keene in the chest. Everything faded. The watchers tore the cables loose, but too late. The Saturn files were gone. Alarms screamed. Flames licked along the walls. The watchers evacuated, dragging a furious Shaw with them. Smoke and fire swallowed the sublevel. For all they knew, Keene was dead, lost beneath rubble. But the war was over. The Saturn files were free. Within hours, the internet flooded with revelations. Anonymous activists, journalists, and digital archivists mirrored the data globally. Attempts by federal agencies to discredit or censor the leak only amplified its reach. Social media exploded. The documents, marked with code names like Operation White Door and Project Switchboard Commission, outlined a staggering conspiracy. Insider collusion with extremist cells, tactical delays to allow maximum casualties, and a years-long war effort, launched not by necessity but by calculated manipulation. Globally, reactions were swift. Allied nations demanded clarification. Adversaries called for emergency UN sessions. The public, confronted with memos showing high-ranking officials debating acceptable civilian losses to justify foreign occupation, erupted in outrage. Protests ignited across continents. Trust in intelligence institutions collapsed. The White House maintained the documents were forged, but the data's digital signatures, metadata, and timestamps matched archived formats and routing protocols from 2 decades earlier. Cybersecurity experts confirmed their authenticity. Even mid-level intelligence employees, shaken by the leak, came forward. In the U.S., the fallout was immediate. Demonstrations surged outside federal buildings. Executives from defense corporations faced subpoenas and class action lawsuits. Stock markets crashed, especially among firms tied to military contracts. Board members resigned en masse. Some fled the country. Retired generals issued half-hearted denials or partial admissions. News headlines screamed betrayal. The nation grieved all over again. This time, not for the attack itself, but for what had been hidden behind it. Major news outlets split. Some reversed course, apologizing for parroting official lines for years. Others clung to patriotic deflection, deepening mistrust. The line between disinformation and whistle-blown truth blurred, but the evidence was too overwhelming to suppress. "You can't unring a bell," one analyst said, "and this bell's been sounding for 20 years. Director Shaw attempted damage control via a televised press conference, but the crowd drowned him out with boos. Calls for hearings soared. In a final, desperate move, Shaw declared a national security emergency, seeking limited martial law. It backfired spectacularly. Several states refused compliance. His grip on power dissolved. Over the following weeks, bipartisan investigations launched. Newly emboldened lawmakers began dismantling the shadow structures that had enabled post-attack profiteering. Sarah Voss, wounded but alive, surfaced as a hero. In a viral column titled "One Man's Last Key Press," she described Keene's final act, completing the upload while bullets flew. The piece moved millions. Thomas Keene became a tragic icon, hailed as the man who shattered the illusion. Families of 9/11 victims demanded new trials. The original commissions were discredited. Even former investigators admitted they'd been lied to, or worse, coerced. The emotional toll rippled across generations. Americans reeled from the realization that decades of grief had been co-opted. Globally, fallout spread. Nations withdrew troops from conflict zones. Parliamentary inquiries opened in allied governments. The world order constructed post-attack began to collapse. Some hoped it might yield a less militarized future. Others feared the chaos could be exploited. Rumors persisted that Keene had somehow survived. Sightings surfaced of a man resembling him. Older, weary, living quietly off-grid. But nothing was confirmed. Official statements declared him deceased. If alive, he had disappeared deliberately. 6 months later, a historic Senate hearing convened. Former defense officials, intelligence heads, and high-ranking politicians were subpoenaed. Some pled the Fifth. Others offered stammered justifications. A few confessed. Indictments followed. Not all led to convictions, but the public reckoning had begun. Sarah Voss launched an independent media platform. Freed from blacklists, she broadcast daily updates, accepted testimonials, and spearheaded a movement toward transparency. Her credibility soared. She became a symbol of journalistic courage in an age of secrecy. 1 year after the Saturn files were released, a new monument rose near Ground Zero. A solitary statue. A man seated, pressing a key. The plaque read, "They took truth in the shadows. He returned it in the light." Visitors left flowers. Some cried, not just for what was lost, but for what was uncovered. The Delta Protocol. Daniel Cross sat bolt upright in bed, drenched in sweat. Sheets tangled like restraints around his legs. The dream had returned, more vivid than ever. Underground tunnels bathed in blue light, the cold metal chair, the leather straps, and voices echoing through concrete. Subject 17 demonstrates increased receptivity, neural amplitude elevated by 30%. His bedroom TV flickered, though he was certain he'd turned it off. The static wasn't random. A low-frequency hum bled through, more felt than heard. It clawed at the edge of his consciousness. Daniel approached the screen. Within the chaos of pixels, shapes formed. Impossible geometry, flickering just long enough to register in the subconscious. His own reflection in the glass stared back, but it looked wrong. Off. Delta Protocol 17. He whispered unbidden. Initiate phase bend. The static screamed into a whine that made his molars ache, then abruptly, silence. The screen went black. Daniel stood frozen. Tears streamed down his face without explanation. By morning, he convinced himself it was a dream. Until he spotted a small red mark behind his ear, a perfectly circular scar he didn't remember getting. The dreams grew more intense. Always the same. The underground lab, the chair, the scientists, the tests. And he was younger, 11, maybe 12. In one dream, he sat on a bench near a lighthouse. An old man with a weathered face approached. "Jesus," the man said, "you grew up. Last time I saw you, you were just a skinny kid with too much power in his head." "What did they do to me?" Daniel asked. The man, Nichols, lit a cigarette. His hands trembled. "You were special. Most of the kids could sense things, move small objects, but you could open doorways." Doorways to where? That was the question. Remote viewing became something else. You didn't just see places, you let things through. Daniel went pale. "The beast," he whispered. Nichols froze. "You remember. It wasn't from here, not even from our universe. You tried to stop it. You failed. 16 people died before we cut the power," Nichols said. "It didn't die, it just folded away, back into something we can't perceive." Daniel pressed his temples. "They shut it down? Officially?" "Yes. But the work continued. Underground. Compartmentalized." Reality shimmered. The lighthouse blurred. Time fractured. In front of him sat a teenage version of Nichols, wearing a camp hero badge, yet speaking with the old man's voice. "Find Bunker 14. Destroy the chair before they use it again." A wave of distortion passed. Nichols vanished. That night, Daniel returned to Camp Hero. He slipped past rusted fences and into the abandoned facility. Guided by memories buried for decades, he reached a concrete door marked 14. Inside, the air was thick with static energy. Down in the depths, past flickering lights and echoing corridors, he found it, the chair. It still pulsed with dormant power. Nearby, a whiteboard showed a countdown. 1 day left. Daniel stepped toward the machine. His vision split. He was his adult self and his child self. 2 timelines converged. The air thickened. "Good morning, Daniel," said a familiar voice from both timelines. Dr. Bennett emerged from the shadows. "You're back," he said. "We never stopped waiting." Daniel clenched his fists. "You have to shut this down. You don't understand what you're doing." Bennett smiled. "No, Daniel, you showed us what's possible, and now we're going to finish what we started." "On the contrary," Bennett said, gesturing toward the upgraded equipment. "We understand far better now. We've spent 4 decades refining the technology, studying the data from the original experiments. The incident in 1983 was a temporary setback. 16 people died. Progress demands sacrifice." His voice sharpened. "And now you've returned, exactly as our models predicted. The prodigal son, drawn back at the precise moment we needed you." Daniel stepped back toward the chair. "I came to destroy it." "You came because you're still connected to it. On a quantum level, you've never really left that chair." Bennett nodded to someone just behind Daniel. "Your life, your memories, your sense of agency, they were all artificial, a holding pattern while your mind developed into the instrument we required." "Too late." Daniel sensed movement behind him. A sharp sting erupted in his neck as a hypodermic needle pierced his skin. The room tilted as the sedative took hold. "Welcome home, Subject 17, Bennett said as the world collapsed into blackness. Tomorrow, you'll help us open the final doorway. Daniel regained consciousness strapped into the chair. Electrodes clung to his temples and chest. The bunker vibrated with energy. Technicians in sterile white coats monitored control panels, while armed guards lined the walls. His mind, clearer than it had felt in days, sifted through once foggy memories, now blazing in perfect detail. His childhood, the experiments, the mounting fear in the eyes of scientists, and most of all, the truth about what emerged in that long-forgotten moment in 1983. Dr. Bennett approached, clipboard in hand. Consciousness has returned. Excellent. The alignment window is narrowing. You can't do this, Daniel rasped, struggling against the restraints. You saw what happened last time. It was unstable. The entity couldn't survive in our framework. Bennett barely looked up. This time, we're prepared. The integration will be contained. Integration. The word echoed through Daniel's chest like ice. You're not just opening a portal. You're trying to let something through permanently? Bennett's smile was cold. Not something, Daniel. Someone. Or rather, someone's. He motioned toward a large monitor where images flashed rapidly. Organic mechanical hybrids, schematics of enhanced human physiology, weapons unlike anything in the known arsenal. They offer knowledge, power, evolution. In return, they need hosts, compatible vessels. Daniel shook his head. They're not visitors, they're invaders, and you're handing them the key. Bennett ignored the warning. Begin the sequence. Power to 70%. The chair shuddered to life beneath Daniel. That old, terrifying sensation returned. The feeling of being stretched across invisible planes, his consciousness peeling away from the shell of his body. Around him, waveforms danced wildly across monitors. Quantum tunneling initiated, a technician reported. Temporal aperture forming. Daniel focused inward. They thought he was a conduit, a tool, but they had forgotten one vital truth. Even he had only just recalled it. He wasn't just the key, he was the door. Back in 1983, as the beast slipped through, Daniel had acted instinctively. He had embedded a quantum-level failsafe into the chair's structure, a secret only he could access. Now, as energy surged around him, he reached for it, his mind expanding beyond space-time, touching the veil between worlds. And something was waiting there, ancient, cold, intelligent. It pressed against the breach like a predator at the edge of a cage. Aperture at 60%, someone called. Dimensional threshold nearing critical. Bennett leaned close, voice trembling with excitement. You can feel them, can't you? They've waited so long. Daniel didn't open his eyes. Yes, he whispered, and they are not what you think. Power spike, another technician shouted. Subject's neural patterns are altering the protocol. Impossible, Bennett turned. Override him, cut neural input. We can't. He's bypassed all safeguards. Daniel opened his eyes. They glowed with a cold, unnatural light. His voice resonated with tones that vibrated glass and bone alike. I'm not opening a door to let them in, he said. I'm creating a vacuum, a one-way passage. The aperture widened. Space twisted. A vortex of colorless wind pulled at everything not bolted down. The very fabric of reality warped around the event horizon. What are you doing? Bennett screamed above the noise. What I should have done 40 years ago. Daniel's restraints snapped. His body levitated, suspended by unseen forces. Around him, reality collapsed into a swirl of impossible geometry. You'll destroy everything. Bennett lunged toward a control panel. Only the infection, Daniel said. The chair, the research, the knowledge that doesn't belong in our world. The void grew wider. A guard screamed as he was dragged into it, his body distorting, then vanishing. Equipment imploded, circuits melted. Bennett made one last lunge, rage etched across his face. We were so close, Daniel met his gaze. They were never coming to share. We weren't allies, we were livestock. The ceiling buckled. Metal screamed. Through the vortex, something massive began to recede. Not entering, but being pulled back. The beast. Its form, incomprehensible. Countless eyes. Shifting patterns. A whisper in Daniel's mind, "You've sealed the gate." But others remain. Daniel pushed a final surge of will into the system, and the breach collapsed. He awoke to the steady beep of medical monitors. Morning sunlight filtered through blinds, casting thin shadows across sterile linens. His limbs felt heavy. Each breath took effort. A nurse entered, startled to see him awake, and summoned the doctor, a kind-eyed woman who informed him he'd been found unconscious near Montauk Point, severely dehydrated and comatose for 6 days. When she asked what had happened, Daniel simply said he didn't remember. 3 days later, he signed himself out, ignoring medical protests. His apartment had been professionally searched. Nothing was visibly out of place, yet everything felt wrong, like a stranger had breathed on every object. His laptop was gone. So were his notebooks. In their place, a slim manila folder. Inside, one document, a job offer from the Department of Energy, tripling his salary. He lit the offer on fire in the sink. Over the following week, Daniel built a transmission rig. He paid in cash. He scavenged high-end components. He assembled a device strong enough to hijack digital feeds across networks. Quiet, invisible, unstoppable. From a cheap motel room booked under a false name, he began recording. My name is Daniel Cross. I was Subject 17 in a classified program known as the Montauk Project. What I'm about to say sounds like fiction. I wish it were. In the late 1970s and early 80s, at a decommissioned Air Force base in Montauk, New York, government contractors ran covert experiments. Mind control, teleportation, dimensional rifts. They used children with psychic potential. I was one of them. They discovered that, when amplified, the human mind could open breaches, not just into space but into reality itself. They made contact with something, not advanced beings, predators, opportunists from outside this dimension, and they brought something through. In 1983, a rift opened. 16 died. Officially, the program was shut down. It wasn't. They just buried it deeper. Last week, they tried again. They used me as the key, but I sealed the gate, destroyed the technology. But their influence lingers, not through possession, through temptation, promises of knowledge, power, evolution. Daniel leaned closer to the lens, his expression hard. If you're hearing this, know one thing. Montauk wasn't the only program. There are other gates, other subjects, and the entities, they're still whispering. He reached forward, ending the transmission. The technology developed at Montauk still exists. Fragmented, scattered across facilities operating under new names and revised objectives. The research continues, quietly buried under layers of plausible deniability. Watch for the signs. Secluded military installations with no clear purpose, clusters of missing children reportedly exhibiting rare cognitive anomalies, meteorological events that defy both physics and explanation. These are the fingerprints, evidence that Montauk was not the end, but only the beginning. I'm embedding documentation with this broadcast, Daniel said. Scanned images, partial research logs, coordinates of suspected continuation sites. There's more. Evidence stored in dead drops across the country. If anything happens to me, those caches will unlock automatically and go public. Follow your instincts. If something feels wrong, deeply, unnervingly wrong, in a way you can't put into words, don't ignore it. The barrier between realities has thinned. Things sometimes bleed through now, even without an active gate. He leaned in toward the camera, eyes shadowed but unwavering. They tried to erase our memories, but memory, true memory, is dangerous, especially when it remembers the future. The recording ended. Daniel uploaded the final files alongside the video. He used decentralized protocols to distribute the data globally, embedding fragments across thousands of servers, too fragmented to purge, too widely mirrored to be dismissed as the paranoid delusion of a single unstable man. When the last file completed seeding, his laptop flickered, static dancing across the screen. But this time, Daniel recognized the signal buried in the noise. It wasn't a threat. It was a beacon. Not from them, the entities behind the experiments, but from others like him. Children of Montauk, awakening, their suppressed memories returning, broadcasting their own truths across the digital void. He wasn't alone anymore. Daniel closed the laptop and slipped his remaining belongings into a backpack. Through the thin motel curtains, he saw two black SUVs pull into the lot. Men in dark suits stepped out, their movements precise, their intent clear. Government operatives. They were too late. The truth had already been set free, circulating through systems they no longer fully controlled. Millions would see it. Some would believe. Some would act. The seed of awareness had been planted. Daniel sat quietly on the edge of the bed, waiting for the knock. But he no longer felt fear. He understood now. What they'd done to him at Montauk hadn't broken him. It had changed him, fundamentally. The abilities they had unlocked, once buried deep, had only been dormant, waiting for a trigger. He closed his eyes and reached out, not with his hands, but with his mind, searching the quantum threads that connected space and time, mapping possibilities like coordinates on a multidimensional grid. There were other places, other timelines. He had always been their best gate opener. The door burst open. Two agents charged in, weapons drawn, ready to detain him. They found an empty room. The window was closed, locked from the inside. The bathroom was empty. On the neatly made bed sat Daniel's phone, its screen glowing with a message addressed to Dr. Bennett. There are other doors, other keys, and now I have them all. 3 days later, across digital networks worldwide, a strange symbol flickered onto millions of screens, just for a second, before vanishing. A triangle intersected by a perfect circle. No agency ever claimed responsibility. No explanation followed. The Montauk Project was never officially acknowledged. Those who spoke openly about it were discredited, silenced, or simply disappeared. The broadcast was written off as performance art, the documents as clever forgeries. Experts called it viral disinformation. But something had changed. People began to notice. Children reported vivid dreams of steel corridors, humming machinery, and chairs they couldn't describe. Physicists at isolated labs logged impossible readings. Near certain abandoned military compounds, time seemed to warp. Researchers documented micro-anomalies in causality, devices that reset themselves, clocks that ticked backwards, memory loops that defied logic. And sometimes, just sometimes, listeners flipping through AM frequencies or staring into static-filled screens at odd hours would hear a whisper at the edge of perception. A voice threaded into the noise. A message, always the same. They made us forget. But memory is a dangerous thing, especially when it remembers the future.